Hi, everybody. Welcome to Read It Again Online's author series. Today we're with Liza Nash Taylor. And is today your pub day?
No, pub
No.
day was the 18th.
So it was last Tuesday.
Yes.
Okay. I knew it's always a Tuesday. So I have, to celebrate this book that I really enjoyed, I have this really cute little bottle of champagne that I plan on opening and drinking during our conversation. But before I do that, let me read your intro, because I think I'm bad at reading to begin with. And then I add this cute little bottle of champagne, and it's not going to go well. Okay. So Liza Nash Taylor was a 2018 Hawthornden. What is that? What did you? Hawthornden. International Fellow, and received her MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts. She, the 2016 winner of the San Miguel Writers Conference Fiction Prize. Her work has appeared in, I should have asked you what these words are before I read
Microchondria.
Gargoyle Magazine and Deep South, among others. A native Virginian, she lives in Keswick with her husband and dogs. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kim. It's so nice to see a bookshop behind you.
Yeah, I'm in the kids section right now. I have a little corner that I put books up.
Okay.
And speaking of books, I love your cover.
Thank you. I love it too. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things. And I was really lucky to be able to collaborate with the cover designer. And I can tell you about the cover. Well, what happened was I worked in design for most of my life, and I knew I wanted to have a say-so in the cover. And I knew I wanted a vintage photograph. So I started looking, and I started looking in a lot of books I have. And I had a book by the photographer Jacques-Henri Lartigue. He was French, and he was very innovative in the 1920s. He developed his own color film. And so I had this book of his from the 1970s, I think. I bought it at the Strand in New York, and when I worked for Ralph Lauren, and I showed it to Ralph Lauren, and he loved the photographs. So I started looking online for more of Lartigue's work that might work as a cover, and I came across this beautiful image of the woman's, her looking sideways, and I just love the mood of this photograph so much. So I contacted the foundation in France that represents his work and has his archive. And it turns out that the woman on the cover, her name is Renee Pearl, and she was a fashion model in Paris. She was from Romania. And the book is not about her, but this photographer saw her on the street in Paris and was so taken with her that he immediately wanted to start working with her, and they were lovers for 2 years. And then after that, and this photo's from 1930, she kind of fell off the map, but he went on to be very famous and have other wives and muses. But after Renee Pearl died in the mid-80s, her family found and then auctioned off a trove of over 300 images of her taken by Lartigue during the time they were together. And this is one of them. So it really wasn't available to the public to see until after 2000. But I traced down the foundation, and we, with kind of hours to spare, we got permission to use that image. And then Alenka Lanashki, who designs covers for Blackstone, came up with the beautiful font and the rose gold and the Art Deco end papers, and I just couldn't be happier with the cover.
It looks really modern. Like I thought it was just a picture of a fashion model.
Like I've heard people say that.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was vintage. I'm like, and it's beautiful. I really did not think that was a vintage photo. I mean, even her nails, they've got white tips.
Yes, yeah, that was a thing. But there are some fabulous, she was quite a style icon in the late 20s. And there's some if you look at the Instagram hashtag Renee Pearl, there's some really great images of her.
Really? Okay. So tell us about your book. Now I'm going to open up my champagne.
Okay. We won't hear that little pop. So it's set in 1924. And it was inspired by a novel that was published in 1722, and A Broken Piece of Porcelain. It's the story of a young woman's regret ambition, and a quest for redemption that takes her from her home in Virginia to Prohibition-era New York and on to Jazz Age Paris in 1925. And all the while, she's asking the question, how do we ask for forgiveness when we have intentionally deceived the people who love us the most? And how do we forgive ourselves?
I'm looking for it so I can put it in the thingy. So I really enjoyed this book.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I love the 20s. So tell us about your research.
Well,
I was on your Instagram page today, and it is filled with pictures of the 20s, and I just loved it. I was sending it to my friend who's also obsessed with the 20s.
Oh, thank you. I love Instagram. It's like Instagram and I were just a match made in heaven, because I love putting together the layouts and writing the descriptions, and I love my Instagram friends. I've made so many nice friends on Instagram. So the research, people will say, "Oh, you write historical fiction, you have to do all that research." Well, that is the best part. So in both of the novels, I have another one coming out next August. I found that research, I find things I call Easter eggs, and those are little historical factoids or events in history that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
Maybe everybody else did, I don't know. But they can either work out to be just a detail of day-to-day life that I find fascinating, and I always like to find those things when I'm reading historical fiction, or else they can really turn a plot on its axis. And that happened for me in both of my novels. And I ended up setting this one in 1924 and 1925 because of Josephine Baker. And also, one thing that influenced it was a trial, and the trial actually happened in 1935, but I was able to take that storyline and move it forward.
When I was in, I don't know, 5th or 6th grade, we were doing the Black History Report, right? You pick a prominent Black American and you write a report. And I chose Josephine Baker, which may not have been appropriate for somebody in elementary or middle school, but I was just so determined. And it's funny because there's all these gorgeous images of her.
Yes.
She worked for the Follies, and I couldn't put any of them in my report. Yeah, I remember.
That's funny.
We actually had a parent-teacher conference about it. Like, my teacher was like, I don't know if this is appropriate. And I'm like, all the other people, everybody's done them over and over again, but nobody's heard of Josephine Baker. Let me do Josephine Baker.
That's fabulous. She was such a remarkable person. She worked for the French Resistance in World War II. She adopted 12 children of different nationalities.
Rainbow.
Her Rainbow Tribe.
Rainbow Tribe.
Yes. I found her so inspiring. And so originally, I had her as a character.
Oh.
And I read 4 biographies of Josephine Baker, and I was trying to figure out how to portray her. And I was advised to not use her as a character, instead to model a character after her. And I was kind of heartbroken at first, but I thought, no, that makes sense, because if I use her as a character, I'm going to be constrained by the actual events of her life, and that might not work with the other elements of my plot. So I created this character, Janie Mullins, who comes from a similar background, and I named Janie after Janie Starks from Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is one of my very favorite books. But creating a character that was inspired by Miss Baker gave me a lot more leeway in how the story could go. But I set my story in 24 and 25 so that my troupe, my African American entertainment troupe, could beat Josephine Baker to Paris and get there before she did. But I also I did some research in Paris, and I contacted the PR people for the Theatre des Champs-Élysées, where Josephine Baker debuted in Le Revue Nègre, pardon my terrible French, in 1925. And they gave me a backstage tour, and it was fascinating. So for research, I got to go through. There was another writer who was
So
writing
for
about the.
research, you went to Paris. Like
Yes,
that does
yes,
not suck.
yes. No, no, I did,
Yeah.
and I was there for a month, and it was fantastic. But I got to go backstage. There was another writer also on the tour. She was from Denmark or somewhere, and she was writing about the Ballet Russe who performed earlier in the 20s at the same theater.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to see all the backstage, which is all painted flat black and about 4 stories high.
Mm-hmm.
And the theater was built in 1913, so it's one of the first Art Deco buildings in Paris, and really beautiful. The light fixtures and the ceilings, there are murals. It's all Art Deco. And in the dressing rooms, there are these murals that look like big watercolor paintings, sort of Aubrey Beardsley looking Art Nouveau nymphs and waterfalls.
Love it.
And they were obviously painted by some bored scenery painter who just didn't have enough to do.
That's awesome. So before you were a writer, what did you do?
Well, I grew up in Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
in Virginia Beach, and I went to Mary Baldwin College, which May also went there.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother went there, and my mother went there. And I could not wait to get out of Virginia, and I wanted to be in fashion design.
Mm-hmm.
So I was accepted to a graduate program at the Fashion Institute of Technology. And I mean, I graduated in like a bat out of hell. I went to New York. And before I finished the program there, I was hired by Ralph Lauren. And that was really my dream come true, except that they wanted us to work until 10 every night and on the weekends. And anyway, it was a great experience, and I loved doing it. And then from there, I moved to Nantucket, where I lived for 7 years and had a shop selling antiques and so forth. And then I got married again. I got divorced and remarried, moved back to Virginia, and moved to the house where I'm sitting. I'm now in the living room of our house that was built about 1830. It's just an old Virginia farmhouse. So I came back here and I started doing some freelance photo styling work, and I designed a line of baby wear made of recycled cashmere sweaters. And I did different things while my daughter was growing up. So I was really, really late to the writing party. But I found, it's funny, I find that writing is just sort of another creative process. When you think about making a garment, it starts out sort of the same way. There's some creative draping, and then there's some mathematical pattern making, and then there are a whole lot of tucks and tweaks and adjustments to hopefully end up with a harmonious garment or, book at the end of it. So it all sort of flowed from one thing to the other for me.
And your main character in your book, she's a seamstress. She wants to make costumes.
That's right.
And so
that's right.
So I guess you write what you know, because one of my questions was, can you sew? But you answered that question.
Yes, when I was 6, my grandfather was an invalid, and he had a lovely nurse, Mrs. Ransom, and she used to knit dresses for my Barbie dolls.
Aww.
And she could kind of look at the Barbie doll and make this form-fitted mini dress. This is in the 60s. And she taught me to knit. And I was so nerdy in grade school and high school. I would make like patchwork quilts for fun. And then that just kept, I made the most elaborate Barbie clothes and Barbie houses. And so, I guess that was an indication then that was the direction I wanted to go in.
Yeah. Well, and then for the book, So speaking of the book, you want to do a reading for us?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you. So we were talking about research. And one of the things I love to do when I'm researching is to read novels and periodicals that are contemporaneous to the time I'm writing about. So I'll go on eBay or Pinterest or whatever and find things because, like, reading novels that were written during the 20s, you get a feeling for speech patterns and slang and just daily details of life. So I I did a search on eBay for the New York Biltmore Hotel, which is one of the settings in the second part in the New York section of the book. And it was torn down in the mid 80s, unfortunately. They didn't save any of the interiors. They
A
did
lot
save
of things were destroyed in the 80s in New York.
yeah, they saved the big clock though. And that's now in the building that replaced it. So I was trying to imagine this grand hotel, and I went and stayed in the Waldorf Astoria in an pretty much unrestored room with an Art Deco bathroom. So one of the things I found on eBay, I hope you can see it. This is a key from the Biltmore Hotel.
That's so
from
cool.
the 1920s.
Because you described the key that she puts in her hand.
Yes, it's quite heavy. And it has Biltmore on one side and then the room number on the other. So this has been sort of like a talisman to me as I've been writing along. And I found two of them actually. And the other one I sent to Rick Blywise, who is the head honcho at Blackstone, because it has a B. But anyway, I've kept this. So
if you find another one, you could turn that into a necklace.
Yeah. Yes. So anyway, I found this, and of course it sort of to me evoked the hotel that is no more. And so I'm going to read you a section. May has just arrived in New York, not knowing anyone. On the train, she's running from the law. She's exhausted and dirty, and she's been walking around New York not knowing anybody. So she's ended up in the lobby of the New York Biltmore Hotel, and it's 7 o'clock at night, and she decides she had better check in, do something. The piano played a waltz, and a woman in a pink raincoat passed, carrying a tiny fluffy dog with a rhinestone collar and a little raincoat of its own. A clerk glanced up with an appraising eye as May approached the desk. "I'm interested in taking a room," she said, trying to muster a semblance of dignity in her state of disarray. "Could you please tell me the rate for a single with a private bath?" He blinked slowly, looking as if he smelled something unpleasant. "All of the accommodations at the Biltmore have private baths, miss. Our rates start at $8. That's per day, not per week. Did you write ahead to tell us of your arrival?" May thought again of Mrs. Emily Post's rules. No, obviously I did not write ahead. $8. The Allerton was $2. $3 for deluxe with breakfast and a shoe shine. She raised her chin and held his gaze. The clerk, she knew, was waiting for her to skulk away, defeated, unworthy of the New York Biltmore Hotel. She placed her handbag on the counter and stood at her full 5'6", looking down at the man. "I'd like a room on a high floor, please." "Certainly." When he held out the register, she wrote, "Miss May Valentine." "Any luggage?" "I left it at Grand Central." "If you have your plane check, I can have it delivered to your room." "Is there an extra charge for that?" "Gratuities are at the discretion of the guest." "And how long will you be with us?" He lifted his spectacles to scrutinize the register. "Miss Valentine?" $8. Damn. "I'm not exactly sure." The key he passed across the desk was heavy, made more so by an oval fob with a script B embossed on the silvery metal. The corridor that led to the elevators was lined with small shops, all closed for the evening. A tailor, an antiques dealer, a jeweler. May stopped to look at the jewelry on velvet pedestals, succulent rubies, sapphires with layered depths of blue, emeralds that defined the color green, and diamonds that gave off a brittle gleam that said clearly, "I am rare, near perfection, not for the likes of you." A long strand of pearls draped over black velvet, and she laid her hand against the glass. The elevator doors were bronze, sculpted with mythical figures and animals. May pressed the call button and leaned closer, studying the design. A bell dinged, and a handsome young Negro elevator operator in a khaki uniform was smiling at her. "Floor, miss?" She stepped in and stood behind him, clutching her handbag and key. 22nd, please. 28 stories. How do they build something this tall? She regarded her reflection in the mirrored paneling with dismay, attempting to smooth her hair. The elevator rose as lights illuminated behind the floor numbers. 19, 20, 21. "Here you are, miss. 22. The operator made a small bow as May exited. The hallway was eerily silent after the streets and the lobby. Her shoes sank into the plush carpeting. In her room, she looked down from the window, awed. She'd never been so high. Below, automobiles looked like toys. Above, storm clouds skittered away, leaving an amethyst evening sky and raindrops dotting the window. A wave of vertigo passed over her, and she backed away to sit on the bed, running her hand over the cool, puffed beige satin of the coverlet. She pried her shoes off and fell back, arms outstretched. She had done it. She had gotten herself to New York City, and she had no idea what to do next.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that. I was listening to it. I was on my row machine at home listening to your book. And I remember that scene. Let me go to my question. So if you could tell your younger self anything, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Don't marry my first husband.
Oh, goodness. You drank to that. Okay. So what was the hardest part of your book to write?
Well, without spoilers, I would say there's a point in the third part where May kind of goes off a cliff as far as she sort of really goes into a dark place.
Yeah. And you can feel that coming through the entire book.
So I did a lot of research for that. It has to do with drug use. And there's a fabulous website. It's called the Arrowwood Experience Vault. And it's a not-for-profit site that posts first-person accounts of people's drug experiences. So you can go on there and look up the first time I shot heroin, the first time I overdosed, the time I did cocaine and mushrooms or whatever. So that was a great resource. But writing that was, when you push your character off a cliff, sometimes you don't want to do it, but you know that they have to go, and you'll have to wait and hear if they hit the ground or not. I know some writers are more they do more plotting, and so they have a better idea of what their characters are going to do. But I tend to like it when mine either surprise me or I won't say disappoint me, but they're making a mistake, and I can see it coming, and you just can't stop them, basically.
So my next question was going to be, are you a pantser or plotter? So I guess you're a pantser.
Yeah, but I do start out knowing, the time, we always have to decide on setting, characters, and time period for historical fiction. So those things are in place. My main characters were in place, and then the other characters sort of speak up and show up. My character Elsie was based or inspired by my maternal grandmother. I told you she went to Mary Baldwin College, and she was May's roommate. So this is a picture of my mother's mother, Elsie.
Oh, it's beautiful.
She was a real flapper, and she could sit down at a party and start playing ragtime, and everybody would be dancing. So I have her, yearbooks from 1917 from Mary Baldwin College and her scrapbooks. So those really gave me a flavor for what it was like to be at an all-women's college at that time.
And I went to an all-women's college, Agnes
Oh,
Scott.
did you?
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
Agnes Scott.
Okay.
In the dorms, there's still rooms with the telephone rooms, little closets. Yeah. And then on each floor, there's a lounge. And that was the only place you could bring a man if you brought him upstairs. I mean, and when I went there, you had to yell out that there was a man on the hall. You don't have to more. Yeah.
Yes. Mary Baldwin was the same in the 80s. And the funny thing is, when May moves to New York, I was thinking, where's she going to live? She doesn't have any money. She's starting out. And I thought, I want her to live somewhere very similar to where I lived in the early 80s when I moved to New York. And that was Robert's house. And it was an all-women's rooming house on 36th Street run by the Lutheran Church. It was rumored that the director had been a nun. And for $75 a week, we got a very small dorm, like a dorm room, and hall bathrooms. Boys, young men could not come upstairs at all. This is pre-cell phone. They could only visit you in the beau parlor on the main floor. And if you went out and met a young man and gave him your number, the switchboard wouldn't put the call through to the hall phone unless he also had your last name. So it was very much more of the same coming from a women's college. But so I started looking online and I thought that's where she should be. And bingo, the Roberts House opened in 1922. So May could live there in 1924. So that was another great little Easter egg of research. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. The beau parlor and all that. And
the phones. Like when I first discovered the phone, I opened up a closet and it was just filled with junk, but you could kind of see the phone in the background. It was still there. And that was like my freshman dorm.
Yep.
Are there other Easter eggs that are based on true stories?
Well, yes, in fact, there was, in my research, I came across, I knew I wanted to write about moonshining because when I was trying to set the time period, I was sitting on the front porch of this house and I knew I wanted to set the book here. And the house was built about 1830. So I had that time period to play with. And I was thinking, what would be an interesting time period in Albemarle County, Virginia? And I remembered having been to my brother-in-law's house when he first moved in, which is a couple farms over from us. And he said, hey, when we moved in, there are these trap doors in the living room floor. And this is where they hid moonshine during Prohibition. So I remembered that and I thought, yeah, there was definitely moonshining going on around here. Well, it didn't take long in researching moonshining in Virginia to come across Franklin County, which was called the moonshine capital of the world during Prohibition. So in 1935, this is something I came across. There was a trial. It was called the Great Moonshine Conspiracy Trial. And long story short, I took that storyline. I don't go into the trial, but I take the storyline of corrupt officials and sheriffs and I move it to the beginning of Prohibition to 1924. What happened was that in Franklin County, there was so much corruption and violence and competition amongst the moonshiners. And there was a ring of local officials and sheriffs who were shaking down the small operators for bribes, for protection money, and pocketing it when they were supposed to be just collecting taxes and fees and fines. And what happened was that because of Prohibition, the Virginia court dockets and the jails were so full of small operators that they just couldn't handle anymore. So the governor said, listen, guys, to his sheriffs and so forth, just charge them a fine and let them go. Let's go after the bigger operators. Well, they were obviously shaking down these guys. So there was a big trial. I think it was the second longest trial in Virginia history. They defrauded the government out of $5.5 million. And that's
That's so much.
roughly $95 million today.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. So that was one Easter egg that that came up, and I thought, oh yeah, can make that work in 1924.
I really enjoyed the moonshiner bit. Like, I would have read a story just of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Like,
Thank
and
you.
a totally different book. I want to read about the moonshining queen of Virginia.
I wonder if somebody's already written that. There was a book, and I can't remember the author, and it was made into a movie. It was called The Wettest County in the World, and it was based on all that violence in Franklin County during Prohibition. I actually came across a still. I do a lot of walking around here in the woods and the mountains, and I came across a pile of bricks and a whole bunch of mason jars.
Really?
And a bunch of broken jars. And I went over and looked at it, and I thought, what is this doing in the middle of the woods? And it, I thought, well, I think it had been a still.
That's so cool. Okay. I'm looking up the book and posting it to the, So what was your favorite setting writing about that you wrote about?
Definitely Paris.
Paris.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, Virginia was, I won't say it was easy, but it was familiar. And then New York, I used, as I told you, the Roberts house where I lived. And then there's an apartment that was one of my first super grotty apartments that was in a walk-up in New York. So, and we actually shared walls with the fire station on East 85th Street.
Well, at least it's not going to burn down.
Well, yeah. I had a roommate who locked herself out, and she actually batted her eyes at the guys at the fire station, and they ran a ladder up and let her in the window.
That's awesome.
True story. But no, Paris, I love Paris. And I had the chance to spend a month there, and I think it was 2015. My daughter was taking classes, and I was signed up for a writing conference, a week-long writing conference. And I knew I had started this novel, and so I was able to really concentrate. I rented an apartment, and that ends up being a setting in the novel. And I would go to museums every day. As I said, I got a tour of the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées, which was invaluable. And I ended up using my favorite museum in Paris as a setting. It's called the Musée Nassim de Commando. It's on the Parc Monceau, and it's a beautiful mansion. Moise de Commando, and again, my book is not about him, but he tore down the house he grew up in a very affluent part of Paris. He was a Jewish banker, and he collected the most amazing, he had a great collection of 18th century art and sculpture. And so he tore down the house he grew up in and built this fabulous house just to house his collection. And after he died, he left the house and all of his collection to the city of Paris. With the proviso that it be left in situ. So you go in, and the furniture is pretty much arranged as it was. You can see the kitchen, and the kitchen is like right out of Downton Abbey. All the copper pots lined up on the wall, and you can see the servants' dining room, and you can go in the bathrooms. And so you really get a feel for as if the Commando family is going to come back in and sit down
through the door. Yeah.
So I spent many days, and the month I was there was in the summer, and there was a heat wave, and it would be easily 100 or 103 in Paris. And Paris, there's not a lot of air conditioning. So I would just be going through, wilting through the Musée Nassim de Commando day after day, just sitting in a room trying to sort of absorb it all. And so that ended up being wonderful to write about that. I would go into the Parc Monceau around the back and look through the iron fence at the house. And there's a scene where May can't get in the front door and no one's there. And she goes around to the park in the rain, and she looks through, and she recognizes the curtains and the windows. So yeah, definitely Paris was my favorite part, writing about that.
So what are you working on now?
Well, I have another book coming out with the wonderful folks at Blackstone. It will come out August 10th, 2021. And it's a standalone sequel to Etiquette for Runaways.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So the working title is In All Good Faith, and that might change. I don't know. But right now I'm working on the pre-publication edits and revisions. And it's set 6 years later during the Great Depression. And it's a dual narrative. So without any spoilers, May will be back, and some of the characters from Etiquette will be back. But then there's a whole nother storyline that is centered around the events of the 1932 Veterans Bonus March on Washington, D.C. And that's another Easter egg. That's another historical event that I really didn't know about. And the more I looked into it, I thought, wow, this could be a great story.
Yeah. So what is the Veterans March?
Well, what happened was we're in the very bottom of the Great Depression in 1931-32. And there were a group of 8 veterans who left Oregon, and their intention was to make their way across the United States by riding the rails or hitchhiking or walking, whatever, because they wanted to petition President Herbert Hoover for the early payment of their war bonuses from World War I. So these bonuses were intended to be paid in 1945. But what happened was, with the Depression, everyone was desperate. They were losing jobs. They were sharecroppers, were losing their land. So these 8 veterans started out, and they got amazing press. And as they made their way across the country, more veterans joined them. And by the time they got to D.C., there were 14,000. And this was in May of 32. Well, the president wouldn't meet with them. And a bill was proposed that the bonuses be paid early, only it would have bankrupted Social Security at that time. So what happened was there was this huge number of veterans descended upon DC in the summer. It was hot. It was unsanitary. The Army was trying to find cots and feed them. The charities, this is pre-national relief, any program of national relief. So they were camping around the Capitol building, along the rivers, in partially demolished office buildings. And, it was really overwhelming and not very sanitary or anything. So the bill was defeated in July. And these people had been there for months. The Salvation Army had libraries set up and so forth. And so many of the men didn't have anywhere else to go, and they stayed. So the president sent out a decree: would everyone please just go home, and we'll revisit this some other time or whatever. But he wouldn't meet with them. And so many stayed that on July 28th, I believe it was, President Hoover sent Douglas MacArthur and the cavalry in to clear the camps. They used tear gas. They burned out these shanty towns, which have always now been called Hooverville. So the term Hooverville from the Depression started with these encampments of veterans. So there were 8,000 left. They were not given time to gather their belongings. They were just burned out. And, I think there were several people killed. So my concept for this book was, what if you take a teenage girl and she goes here with her father and they get separated? What would happen?
Yeah. Ooh, I can't wait. That sounds really good.
Thank you.
I love history. So I love anything that weaves it in, and you definitely have done your research, so that makes it even better.
Thank you. Well, it's a semi-sequel to Etiquette for Runaways. So you could read the second one, having not read Etiquette, and it should make sense.
Okay, so what are you reading? You read anything good?
I'm reading, okay, I'm always reading more than one book. You
That's
probably
fine.
are too.
Mhm.
And then I'm also listening to something. So right now I'm reading a Blackstone title called Spindle City by
Rainbow
Jotham
City.
Morello. And we're
Uh-huh.
actually talking together tomorrow at a
Oh,
library event. We'll talk historical fiction. This is
oh, I
set at
love
the
it.
turn of the 20th century in a mill
Mhm,
town in Massachusetts,
mhm.
Fall River. It's great. And then I'm also reading Green Dolphin Street by Elizabeth Goudge. I got a
Oh,
1944. Smells wonderful. I love
oh, I
that
love
book.
that smell. Yeah.
So those are, and then I'm also I'm not listening to anything right now because I'm getting ready to go in and do my edits. So I don't like
Mhm.
to have, but I did just finish listening to Alka Joshi's The Henna Artist.
Oh, yeah, this was really good.
Yeah, it's just been optioned for by Miramax,
Uh-huh.
and she, like me, is a late blooming novelist. She was 62 when this debut novel came out in
Mhm,
March, and it got to number 14 on the New York Times hardcover bestseller list. It's a great audiobook.
mhm.
Great audio. I love audiobooks.
Oh, me too. I love Libro. That's my buddy.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do Audible.
Mhm.
So what's your favorite audiobook ever?
Um,
You have one?
We Were the City was really well done. It's got sound effects in it.
Oh.
So it's fantasy. That was really good. I love things that are read by the author. So Bill Bryson,
Oh,
he's
I
got
love him.
yeah, he's got a great book on the 20s.
Yes, I listened to it, and I love A
Yeah.
Walk in the Woods.
Walk in the Woods, me too. Oh, we just watched that movie actually with my kids because they're old enough to watch it now. When it came out, they were not. So, but I highly recommend Libro FM because it gives a portion of each sale to your favorite independent bookstore.
Oh, that's great to
Yeah,
know. I didn't
yeah,
know that.
they're great, and even like I know your publisher really likes Downpour, which I use on occasion, but I love Libro. So you could choose what you were telling me earlier. What's your favorite independent bookstore?
Oh, New Dominion Bookshop
Mhm.
in Charlottesville, and they opened their doors in 1924, which is the same year
Ah,
that my book is set.
well, that's awesome.
And I had my one and only live book event there in February before everything shut down.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
they've been really supportive.
Yeah. So we have. Well, before we do that, what did you read growing up? I was going to ask you what you read researching the book, but we've already been over that.
Yeah. I loved growing up. I think my favorite book was my grandmother gave me a copy of The Secret Garden by
Um,
Frances Hodgson Burnett, and it was
mhm,
illustrated by Tasha Tudor. And then she gave me A Little Princess by the same author, same
mhm.
illustrator. And after that, I think I don't know, I must have been 7 or 8 or 9. I had a yearning to be an abandoned English orphan for for a long time.
Well, you can write about one now.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, but yeah, so that was growing up. I read a lot of biographies. I
Mhm,
loved history. I'm like pre Harry Potter
mhm.
and but I loved those books.
So your grandmother was an important person for you to become a writer. Like she.
Actually, it was my other grandmother who gave
Oh,
me books more. Yeah, yeah, I don't remember my maternal grandmother ever giving me books or anything. Hmm, don't remember that.
it's okay. It sounds like you were nurtured to be a big reader and writer.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, yeah.
that's
Um,
cool.
my mother would take me to the library every week, and I would get a great big stack of
Mhm.
biographies or, books about English orphans.
I love that.
But that then translated into, getting into my teens. I guess that the progression of that would be that then I went on to Jane Eyre
Mhm.
and to the Brontes, and that really nurtured a love of literature.
Mhm.
And then when I discovered audiobooks, I went through all of Dickens and Austen and all of
Mhm.
those because I love a good English narrator,
We
right?
have a big event coming up. We're having a Jane Austen panel with Sonia Kamal and Natalie Jenner and a professor of British Lit from LSU.
How fabulous.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm working on doing a Bronte panel as well.
That's fabulous.
Mhm.
When I before I started my MFA, I was
Mhm.
taking some classes in literature, and one of the classes I took, this was right when online learning was really taking off, and I was able to take a class at Harvard called Crime and Horror in Victorian Literature and Culture. It was
I would take
amazing.
that class.
It was really, really fabulous.
Oh, I would totally take that class. Okay. Thank you, Liza, for joining us. If you guys, we have copies in stock. Can you send us some book plates, autographed book plates?
I'd be delighted to. Yes.
Yay!
Yes, as many as you like.
Oh, we
I've
would
been
love
working on my signature and,
signature. Yeah,
making
the
it
thing
look
is you
artsy.
have two signatures, one that's your real signature, and then one that you sign books with.
Yes.
So that's what I've heard.
Yes. And I was terrified when I first went into New Dominion Bookshop to sign the
Mhm.
giant stack.
Mhm.
It's such a rite of passage for a novelist, right?
Mhm.
And there were 70 books for me to sign. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to spell someone's name wrong or spell my own name wrong
Yeah.
or, hesitate and scribble across the page. But I didn't. I got through it. It was fine.
I don't think I'd be very good at that either. I think by the end it'd just be a line.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not really confident enough to do that.
Oh, okay. So I was saying, we have books in stock. I would love for everybody to buy a copy from us. It'll be autographed. But you don't have to support us. I would like you to, but you don't have to. Find your local independent bookstore like New Dominion Bookshop in Virginia.
Yes.
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 I put a link in the comments. It's over there.
Great.
Or down here, so that you can look them up. Thank you again, Liza, for doing this. We have to do it again when your next book comes out.
I would love to,
I would
Kim.
love
Thank
that.
you so much. And I'd love it if anybody wants to get their book from Read It Again Bookshop. I will personalize a book plate for you and send it directly to you or send it to the bookshop.
Mhm.
Kim, thank you. It's really
you.
been fun talking to you. You're really good at this. And enjoy that champagne.
Oh, I will. It's almost gone. I
Oh,
spilled
okay,
half
good.
of it on the floor when I opened it. I don't think you saw that, but most of it is on the floor or over here. But I really did enjoy it. I like the little straw that I was given.
Good,
I've
good.
never had champagne through a straw. It's a little weird. I'll admit it. A little bubbly. All right, guys, we're going to say good night. Thank you again. Night.
Good night. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.